If you're going to get wisdom, you can't operate with arrogance. If you want to get wisdom, you cannot operate as if you can't be teachable. If you want to get wisdom, you got to come in asking questions. If you want to get wisdom, you have to be willing to temporarily debase yourself. You have to be willing to temporarily not be the one talking the most. You have to be willing to temporarily listen more than you talk. Because that is about gaining access, gaining understanding, gaining growth, gaining things that is transformative. Hi, everybody. I'm Lee Scott. Thank you for watching and or listening to this week's episode of Leading with Lee, where we talk about life, leadership, and legacy. I want to help you unleash your capacity and level of leadership. I'm so excited that you are here for this week's episode because I have something great to share. But before I share my topic for today, if you have not done it yet, go and subscribe to Leading on YouTube and all podcasting platforms. Well, we saw in recent weeks how the nations was looking at college basketball because every single March, there is March Madness. And this year was particularly exciting because of the women's game has changed so much. We're seeing women's basketball change a lot in America. We're seeing stars rise up across women's basketball, like the great Caitlin Clark, who we'll talk about a little bit later, and Hannah Hidalgo and Juju Watkins and other young women who have been phenomenal players in our nation. And we saw how about a week or two ago, we saw the South Carolina Gamecocks win the national championship for the second time in 3 years. This Gamecocks team has been such a phenomenal team, how they've won 109 games over the last 3 seasons, and I only have had 3 losses. And Staley, who is their coach, a legendary basketball player in her own right. She was on the 96 Olympic team that really set up the WNBA and was really instrumental as one of the first players in the WNBA. She led this team after losing her starting 5 last season. She came into the season and led her team to a perfect record of 38-0. But there was something that's really interesting about Coach Staley that I wanted to look at a little bit, because early in Coach Staley's career at the University of South Carolina, she didn't have a lot of great seasons. She even had a situation where she lost to another legendary coach, the Stanford coach, who was just about to retire, Tara Vanderveer, and she asked Coach Vanderveer to come and speak to her team after they defeated them in a regular season game. And she asked Coach Vanderveer to come and give a pep talk to her players because she felt that it was important that our players understood what a winning attitude looked like. And you can see throughout Staley's career and throughout Staley's life that she prioritized this idea that I can learn from anybody and I can grow in any way. But I think she has this perspective because of my topic today. And my topic today is the complexity of humility, the complexity of humility. Coach Staley is such a superstar coach. He's now become one of the greatest coaches in college basketball history, particularly on the women's side. And she's among some of the great names in college basketball. And she understood that even though her teams weren't that great at first, she could learn from other people. She did not have pride. And so she operated with a level of humility by asking for her former coach to speak into her life. Now, before I get into talking more about my subject today, I want to give you my leadership definition. I believe this is an aspect of this conversation of leadership. And I think that you and I can really learn from this definition. And I've had this definition for some years now, and I think it's really impactful. I believe that leadership is seeing something that has not happened yet and taking people, organizations, and personal processes in that direction. Leadership is seeing something that has not happened and taking people, organizations, and personal processes in that direction. I want to do some defining today, but before I get into defining my topic or give you my 4 points, before I give you my definition of humility, I want to give you my 4 points, and then we can get into my topic for today. Number 1, humility attracts trust. Number 2, humility attracts wisdom. Number 3, humility attracts resources. And number 4, humility drives responsibility. Now let's define humility. I decided to look it up because I think if I'm going to talk about a topic, I need to understand, and we need to understand and have context of what it means and why it's so important. Humility is defined as a modest or low view of one's own importance. We see this with Coach Staley, how she had a good view of herself. She understood that though she wanted to be a confident and productive coach and she wanted her players to be better, she was really willing to seek out wisdom early in her career because she thought that it was an important aspect to her team's growth and her team's success. In order for her to become a better coach, she was willing to seek out the wisdom and understanding of those who have been in the space much longer than she had. And it was quite clear in her approach to Coach Vanderveer. And we see this as an important thing to note as we get started, that last time on Here on Leading, I talked about dignifying people and the power of dignity and why that is an important aspect of how we engage with one another. And I think that it's also important that people operate with what we're talking about today, and that's humility. So to my first point, let's talk about how humility attracts trust. Probably the greatest scorer in college basketball history, and she has broken all the records and proven to be the greatest scorer in college basketball history. And some people have debated whether or not they want to give her the title, and people are entitled to their opinion. But the best scorer and greatest scorer in college basketball history is none other than Caitlin Clark. Over the last 2 years, she has been electric in the culture. She has really brought a lot of eyeballs to college women's basketball, women's college basketball. She's been such a critical and pivotal part of people looking at women's basketball in a new light. And it has already had an effect on the WNBA. They're literally, before Clark has even been drafted, a lot of WNBA teams have increased their ticket value because of Clark's presence or possible presence in the WNBA. And it's a really exciting time for them. But I want to talk about the last few weeks, how Clark in particular has been an electric player. But last year when South Carolina played them in the tournament, she had a young woman defending her by the name of Raven Johnson. And Raven Johnson is a pretty good player. She actually is a pretty solid defender. But Clark had her way with Raven Johnson last year in the tournament. She actually, there's so many social media memes that you can see where Caitlin Clark would wave off Raven Johnson. She would ignore, she wouldn't play defense against Raven Johnson because she believed Raven Johnson wasn't even on her level. She actually put up 41 points last year versus South Carolina, had an incredible game, and actually ended South Carolina's perfect season up until that. And this actually was a huge thing for the South Carolina team. They knew that they needed to get better and be more effective in this upcoming season. And even Johnson probably would admit that she did not have a great performance against Caitlin Clark. She would probably admit that she was not her best self in those games. But I think there was something about Coach Staley. Coach Staley understood something about Raven, and she believed in her and gave her a second chance. And I think Raven Johnson was willing to do the work. She was willing to get back in the gym, to learn, to grow, to be more effective, because she also knew that there was going to be more dependence on her this coming school year, considering the fact that the whole starting five from last year's team graduated. The young women from the last team are gone on. And so Raven Johnson knew that she needed to be a leader on this team. And Coach Staley trusted her this time around again. In the national championship game, as those of us who watched, Caitlin Clark got to a hot start in the first quarter, she scored 18 points in the first quarter, was electric in the first quarter. But over the next 3 quarters, Raven Johnson played defense specifically against Caitlin Clark. She got a second chance to engage Caitlin Clark. And over the next 3 quarters, she helped hold Caitlin Clark to only 12 points and actually stole the ball from Caitlin Clark 3 times in the game. This critical defense actually was very helpful for South Carolina because it allowed them to be able to be more productive on the offensive end. South Carolina out-rebounded Iowa in the game, and they were more productive. And she was able to stop the best shooter in college basketball. This is a powerful thing for us to consider because Coach Staley did not have to trust Raven Johnson. Coach Staley did not have to give Raven an opportunity to step up to the plate, but there was something about Raven's attitude that Coach Staley believed that this young woman could do it. And I really believe that humility brings second chances and opportunities to try again. It wasn't that Raven Johnson wasn't required to get better. It wasn't that Coach Staley could have used another player. It was that there was something about Raven's attitude that indicated to Coach Staley that she could trust Raven again. I think you and I have to understand that in order for us to attract transformation in our own lives, we have to be willing to be humble about what we're dealing with. We have to actually humble ourselves and say, hey, I didn't get it all right this time. I made some mistakes. I wasn't perfect. I wasn't great in our relationship. I wasn't great in my communication with you. I wasn't great in how I approach this issue. Can I get a second chance? And I think that's important for you and I. I see it all the time in my own relationship. Sometimes I'm not the best communicator. Sometimes I'm not effective in how I could say or express something. And I recognize that anytime I apologize and acknowledge my failure, it builds another block of trust. You have to understand that trust is earned. Trust is earned. I was at an event not too long ago, and I heard an elected official say this, that most of the people in our communities are looking for people that they can trust. They're looking for people who would actually do the work of earning their trust. Trust is not given. We can't treat the public or treat people as if they don't have an opinion. Your opinion does matter. Your beliefs matter. Your thought process matters. How you feel about a particular situation, it does matter. And I think it's important for us to have that insight because in order for us to be able to truly grow and be more effective and have more people come alongside us when we need them to, it happens as a result of us operating with humility. People trust people that they believe are going to be humble about the situation. People trust people who are willing to say, I made a mistake, or I did not get this all right, or I may have misunderstood or misinterpreted what you said. So how can we get to a better place? This is what we need in our society more than ever. And I stated this in the last episode, that some of the reason why I'm talking about this issue is because this is something that we don't see quite often in our culture. We think this idea of humility is weakness. It's not weakness. It takes great strength to operate with humility, to at least say, you know what? It is in my best interest to just listen to what people have to say. Whether I agree with them or not, I believe that it's my job to ultimately get answers based on what I learned in those conversations. And that is important for you and I as we are growing and doing the things that we are doing in our lives. We have to operate with humility. My second point, humility attracts wisdom. And I think this point is probably going to be the anchoring point of this conversation, because I think if you operate with humility, it brings forth the knowledge and resources that you might need. Now, you may ask yourself, what does wisdom mean? Well, wisdom is the quality of having experience, knowledge, and good judgment. It is the body of knowledge and principles that develops within a specific society or period. In other words, it is something that you and I can gain. It is something that gives us an insight into things that we may or may not know. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who I've talked about before here on Leading, is probably considered one of the greatest presidents of all time here in the United States. He's probably one of probably arguably the top three. It's probably him, George Washington, and Abraham Lincoln. Most historians will probably say that these are the top three presidents. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt is someone who was our longest serving American president. Roosevelt, quite frankly, was someone who had a big personality, was a very strong and thoughtful leader. He came from a quite wealthy family. He lacked for nothing in New York State as he was growing up as a child. And something happened to him in his late 30s that was transformative. As we well know, he contracted polio. And this actually caused him not to be able to walk. He actually did not have the function of his legs for the rest of his life. This debilitating illness caused him to not be able to function on his own. And because of this experience, it changed his outlook on humanity and actually changed his outlook on how elected officials should serve the public. And one thing that we see with Roosevelt is that at this point, he is the governor of New York. And the Great Depression happens in 1929. He had been elected governor of New York the year before. And the federal government did not take it upon themselves to help as much as they could to transform people's lives. They thought the president at the time was Herbert Hoover, and Hoover believed that it was the responsibility, it wasn't the government's responsibility to engage in helping the American people. And Roosevelt found this to be quite disconcerting. And 4 years later, when Roosevelt becomes president in 1932, Roosevelt assembles intellects, experts, and thinkers at the White House. Some of these individuals he started engaging with were very critical leaders in his decision to create the New Deal. These leaders he called the brain trust. They became the brain trust for the president. He had the likes of people like Adolf Berle, and who was a thought leader and a diplomat. He actually was very instrumental in talking about the idea of corporate governance. You had Raymond Moley, who was a Ivy League professor, a very brilliant man, and he differed in some ways with Roosevelt on his beliefs and really challenged the status quo of Roosevelt. But he was someone who engaged in trying to shape that policy in American life. You see people like Rex Tugwell, who was an economist. You had people like Harry Hopkins, who later became a commerce secretary and was really critical in shaping the idea of the New Deal. All these individuals were involved in those conversations with President Roosevelt that actually shaped how American life became post the Great Depression. These individuals were involved in pushing forth policies that reshaped and restructured how the American government served the people writ large. We see the creation of the Social Security Administration and all these agencies that temporarily gave people jobs to build railroads, to build bridges, to do all these things that were so significant in transforming American life. And all these people had a role in shaping these policies. Because FDR believed that he didn't have to be the expert. He could just hire the experts. He could be the one that chooses to say, you know what, in order for this thing to change, I'm not going to see people that are like me. I'm not going to see people that have the same expertise. I'm going to seek out people that could be the answer to something that I needed to get answered. He recognized that he needed those connections. He needed those individuals to speak to policy things that he wanted to use to bring America into a new fold. He actually needed those individuals to be a part of the process. And it changed how America functions in the lives of everyday people. He gave us a powerful speech about the common man and how this is something that is a primary function of the American government. And one thing I believe, that wisdom recognizes that it doesn't have to have all the answers, but it can employ the answers. What you and I can do in our lives is seek out wisdom. We can seek out knowledge. We can seek out experience. We can seek out good judgment in order for us to not make bad decisions in our lives. I'm not an expert in finance, so it probably be smart for me to seek out a financial advisor in order for me to make better decisions. I'm not an expert in interior design, so it might be wisdom for me to seek out people who know something about interior design. I'm not an expert in a lot of subjects. If I want to know about something, I should seek out expertise in order for me to get better and in order for me to grow. Could you be holding yourself back because of your unwillingness to seek out experts or folks who may have the answers for you? It is an imperative that you and I not hold ourselves back because of our unwillingness to engage information that may cause us to stretch. You and I need to be stretched in our perspective and our thought processes about how we are changing our own lives. I'm not a parent currently, but I probably could read some books about parenting or listen to some folks who are parents or have conversations with people who have adult children and have been through the processes that I'm about to go through at some point. Why is all of this important? It's because I'm seeking wisdom. Listen, it doesn't have to be exactly the same thing, but it actually could be a key to how you can operate in certain spaces. You know, one of the things that I think is important is that you and I remember that we need other people. There's a reason why you don't have all the knowledge. There's a reason why you don't have all the understanding. There's a reason why you and I do not have every single piece of the puzzle. Because if we had every single piece of the puzzle, we would not understand that we need other people. There's a reason why you and I need other people. We need to engage other people in conversations so that we can be better. And I think that's important for you and I. That's important that as we are having this conversation about being transformative and doing the things that we do in our lives, we got to keep in mind that we need to seek wisdom. But the only way that you can get wisdom is operating in humility. If you're going to get wisdom, you can't operate with arrogance. If you want to get wisdom, you cannot operate as if you can't be teachable. If you want to get wisdom, you got to come in asking questions. If you want to get wisdom, you have to be willing to temporarily debase yourself. You have to be willing to temporarily not be the one talking the most. You have to be willing to temporarily listen more than you talk. Because that is about gaining access, gaining understanding, gaining growth, gaining things that is transformative in your life. But that takes humility. And you and I can operate in that in our lives. I'm going to take a break right here, and we'll be right back after these messages. Want to promote your business, products, or services? Email me at scottconsultations@gmail.com. I would love to push forward the banner of what you're trying to accomplish, whether it is a product, whether it's your services or your business. I would love to work with you and be an advocate for what you're doing in your respective spaces. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you. And we are back. Thank you for still watching or listening to this episode. I hope that you've been inspired what I've been sharing about how essential it is for us to operate with a level of humility. I want to get to my next point, and I think that this is something that is critical and important and also encouraging, is that humility often attracts resources. Humility attracts resources. And as many of us know, there are crises around the world right now, and humanitarian aid organizations are often on the front line addressing these issues. There's a variety of of things that I could talk about as it relates to the crisis, whether it be war, whether it be famine, whether it be natural disasters. We are seeing globally there is such a need for humanitarian assistance. The American Red Cross, which was founded by Clara Barton in 1881, is an organization that has dedicated its mission to serving folks in need. It was started by a group of nurses who thought it was important to serve soldiers after the Civil War and throughout the time post that era in American history. And their work began to grow and shift over time. By 1900, it had established itself as a leader in disaster response and blood banking. They actually were helping folks. We know them for doing blood drives across America to help folks who need access to blood plasma and things like that. And because of their work, they have been instrumental in impacting the lives of patients who are at the hospital who needs assistance, but they also have been engaged in helping communities that are affected. We saw it recently here in Mississippi, how in Rolling Fork, Mississippi, when they had these devastating tornado, how the American Red Cross was one of the organizations that made it their business to be present in the city of Rolling Fork and helping that community and serving the people in that community who were affected by this tragedy. And one thing I think is powerful is that their work has brought people together and brought people into the fold to do something that they probably usually would do. But it also brings up something that is really essential for us, is that, as you and I will have come to learn, is that this work that's transformed people's lives is impactful. But also it does another big thing. It brings its financial support to these organizations. We saw in 2021 how the American Red Cross, their budget was $2.8 billion. That means they had the resources to be able to engage in a lot of work that made a difference in the lives of so many people. And I think one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that when we operate with humility, people tend to come alongside us. People tend to be willing to invest in our missions, invest in our organizations, invest in the lives of us because they believe in what we're doing. And one thing that we can do is invest our finances. Finances, it takes money to improve the quality of life for people. It takes money to transform people's lives. It takes finances for people to be able to engage you and receive the things that they need. And one of the things that I think is important to keep in mind is that you and I have that opportunity in our lives, that we can be on the front line. We can start projects. We can engage in work. We can assist others. We can do what's necessary to be helpful to other people. We can be engaged in assisting people who are in need. And I think that that's important. I think that that's something we should keep in our minds and something that we should strive towards, is that we may be able to give $5 or $10, maybe give something that people need in that regard. But let's be clear, resources is not always financial. Resources is having things that others need. It's meeting a need. Your resource might be your time. Your resource might be your connections. Your resource might be the relationship that you have with organizations. I literally just this week connected some folks that I know in the organization I work for, to connect to some people that I know to the organization I work for, because they had some information, they had some knowledge that would have been beneficial to the work that we do as an organization. That was a resource. They did not have a relationship. They did not have the connection. They did not have the bandwidth or even the credibility to be able to get this person to say yes. But I leveraged my resource. I leveraged my relationship because I recognized that these people were approaching this topic from a place of humility. They weren't coming into the topic saying that we're the experts, but we're coming into the topic saying, hey, we want to be helpful. We want to come alongside folks that are already doing work. We want to do things that is beneficial to folks that are in need. And there's somebody I've had here on Leading with Lee. I can consider him a friend and someone I always have admired. And I actually give to his organization a friend of mine named Evan Dogood. You remember Evan? He came on here some years ago and shared about his mission of what he was doing in the work that he was doing. Now he has this great organization, Be Heard Movement, that have for the last few years been very effective in serving unhoused folks, how they have engaged in getting people apartments, getting people access to mental health care, helping people get the things that they need. They give people showers every single week. This is something that they do. And every time they look up, people are sending them water. People are sending them resources. They're organizations that give thousands of dollars to support the cause of Be Heard Movement. There's a board of directors who have come alongside and support the work that they do because people want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. People want to be a part of something that matters and actually is improving the lives of individuals that are in need. And one thing I want to be very clear about is that if you're doing something good, finances will come to you eventually. If you're doing something that's making a difference in people's lives, people are going to want to invest in that because they feel that they are being a part of the answer and not perpetuating the problem. And this is just a sad reality that a lot of times disaster and devastation tends to bring people together. And I was thinking a lot about how in 2005, during Hurricane Katrina, how here in Jackson, even though we are not that close to the coast, we weren't as devastated as significantly as folks experienced in New Orleans and even on the Mississippi Gulf Coast and even in parts of Alabama. But we had some impact here in Jackson. And I noticed even here in my neighborhood, how most of our neighborhoods lost power. Many trees fell on people's homes. There was a lot of flooding that happened throughout parts of Jackson. And I noticed how the people in my community, people on my street, we were without power for at least a week or two. And I remember how the people in my community came together. Folks had generators, and people had coolers, and they had stocks of food in their deep freezers, and folks was grilling for folks on the street and ensuring that folks had food to eat. They ensured that people might have had gas to put in their generators or be able to get from place to place if they needed to go somewhere. They were sharing things with each other, not because they had to, but this moment that we could not control, a hurricane that was so impactful and devastated so many people, brought people together with their resources and their time. One thing that we know for sure is that life has a way of humbling us and giving us an opportunity to serve others. And I hope that you will recognize that today, that as we've been talking about humility, you will not take it lightly that you can make a difference in somebody's life. You can make a tangible difference in someone else's life if you are willing to give up the resources that you have. My last and final point, and I'll get you on out of here, is that humility drives responsibility. There's a former president of Poland, and he was a pro-democracy activist. Lech Walesa was someone who had deep convictions. President Walesa was someone who, in his career, he was a shipyard electrician by trade. And during the early 1970s, he got involved in organizing against the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had control of Poland at the time. And he really believed that it was necessary for them to push democracy and people having the right to elect their leaders and determine their own future. He really believed that it was necessary that these people had self-determination. And in the midst of this, it cost him a lot. It cost him his livelihood. It cost him jobs. He was arrested several times and in prison because of his work to push for democracy. And this drive came from his belief that he along with his fellow countrymen, were responsible for their future. He wasn't doing it to try to lift up himself and become some significant figure, but he did the work because he believed that the people in his country deserve to determine who they will become. They needed to determine their own future. They needed to come together and actually do something greater. I think this man had no goal of someday being president of his nation. But that experience of seeing his people disenfranchised by the Soviet Union drove him to say, hey, I want to be a responsible person and be engaged in transforming my nation. There's a quote by him that I thought was really striking. He says, the sole and basic source of our strength is solidarity of workers, peasants, and the intelligentsia, the solidarity of the nation, the solidarity of people who seek to live in dignity, truth, and in harmony with their conscience. He says this in light of the fact that he wasn't being dignified in his own country. As you all know, the last episode I talked about dignity. And he says this because he wants people to come together and take a national responsibility, that it is about the consciousness of a people, saying that we are not going to sit to the side and not be engaged in making our communities better. Now, that may not seem like a thing that you would want to do, but let's bring it home for you. In your family, the humility should drive you to responsibility. Understanding that my cousins or my siblings or my spouse or my friends could actually live a better life if only I would see myself as taking responsibility for them or covering them or standing beside them when they need it. You don't realize the impact that could have. You could be making a significant change in someone's life by saying, I'm going to be responsible and step up to the plate and support them. I know the situation is not about me. President Walesa knew that this situation wasn't about him. He understood that it was going to cost him something. And he did it because he believed that it was the right thing to do for the sake of his nation. And this is something that I think we have to get in our minds, that we got to be willing to make sacrificial decisions, because we recognize we must be responsible in our own actions. And I hope today, as I've been talking about this idea of humility, you've been encouraged to understand what it is that you can do. You and I, right now, in our own unique ways, could make a significant difference in the spaces that we are in. That means operating with an idea that, hey, I need to earn trust. I just can't assume that people should just trust me. I need to earn it. I need to be engaged in conversations. I need to be engaged in the work. I need to be engaged in trying to make things better. I need to. I need to earn people's trust and actually seek out wisdom, because I don't think that I know everything. I need to be somebody that people find trustworthy so I can get resources. I want to do these things because that drives me towards responsibility. That drives me towards operating in a way that is beneficial to the people that I say that I'm connected to, whether it be relationally, whether it be at my job, whether it be at any aspect of my life. I want to show up the right way. This is a necessary thing. And I'll end with this. There's a woman that we all probably have some idea of. She wasn't a president. She wasn't a world leader. She wasn't a political leader or social leader or anything like that. But her operation in her life made her someone that people admired. She had a heart for the poor. She was an outspoken advocate for transformation and change for those people. And she's someone that we, in our culture and history, have admired. Mother Teresa. This woman was not a large, huge personality. She wasn't someone who always had the resources. She wasn't someone who always had the connections, but she had a belief that it was her responsibility to serve people in need. Will you serve people in need? Will you see yourself as a part of the betterment of other people's lives? Will you see your life as being better because you operated in humility? Humility is a powerful tool. It's not weak to operate in humility. It takes great strength to operate with humility, to acknowledge that you may not know everything, to acknowledge that you have limitations. That takes humility. And I hope that you keep that in mind as you're going forward and make a difference in your own space and in your world. Much love, and I'll see you next time here on Leading With. Thank you for watching and or listening to this week's episode of Leading with Lee. If you have not done it yet, subscribe on YouTube and all podcasting platforms. If you want to get more information and connect with me, visit me at www.leeascott.com or follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Lee A. Scott II or Lee A. Scott II. So, thank you for watching, much love, and let's get started.